Afterword. What writers, artists, scientists, and philosophers say today is indicative of future rather than current developments. The growing power of the state produces, as we have seen, considerable dismay, particularly amongst those for whom, only 10 or 20 years ago, socialism was the guarantee of progress. But this idea has so far only gained hold of a section of the public. The magic which concepts like centralization and planning possess today, and the idea that almost everything else can be sacrificed for economic security, still hold the masses under a spell, and their power will probably increase. It is still considered heresy to reject the materialistic version of socialism, just as 30 years ago, socialism was itself a heresy. The anti-totalitarian tendencies described are not evenly distributed among the intellectuals. Writers and artists reject the centralized state much more decisively than do scientists and engineers. We have eminent scientists who admire Soviet Russia unreservedly and even submit to the discipline of the Communist Party, while writers of both the right and the left do not, as a rule, follow the party line. They distrust any restriction on their liberty by the state, even when they are dependent on the state for economic support. On the other hand, the majority of scientists rely on the state for support of their work, which depends less on the individual and which, moreover, society regards as useful. The fact that authors like Guide, Malraux, Maritain, Koestler, and Bertrand Russell, each in his own way, remains skeptical about Russian communism and the values of the machine age would not of its own produce a political movement, not even if these authors were agreed among themselves. For a political movement must be not just the expression of an idea, it has also to represent the material interests of part of the population, without which no political organization can be created. In England, where there are only two parties of any consequence, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, attempts to found new parties have always failed because they only represented sectional interests. Even the Communist Party has never enjoyed much of a following, despite its Soviet Russian aura, although it has at times exercised considerable influence. One must, however, allow for the time factor. 50 years ago, a socialist was seen here as a follower of a cause which had no chance of success, as an odd man out or a rebel, despaired by the leaders of society and almost ignored by the masses. And yet, today, the principle of public ownership is accepted by almost everyone, including many who call themselves conservatives. It proved acceptable because it seemed appropriate to the structure of an industrialized country, and because it brought advantages for the majority of the people which unrestrained capitalism had denied them. Today, the whole world is moving towards a tightly planned society in which personal liberty is being abolished and social equality unrealized. This is what the masses want, for, to them, security is more important than anything else. But why should this last any longer than the trend established about 1900, when private profit was the thing that mattered most? There will be a change of direction once centralization and bureaucracy come into conflict with the interests of large groups. Those intellectuals who, today, are rebels do not suffer economic hardship because almost every intellectual is better off than before. As soon as his most urgent needs are met, he discovers that it is not so much money and status he lacks as liberty and a world not wrecked and made soulless by the machine. Those are the things that really matter. In seeking such things, he is, of course, swimming against the tide. The question is, will the masses ever rebel in this way? Will the man in the street ever feel that freedom of the mind is as important and as much in need of being defended as his daily bread? No convincing answer springs to mind, but there is one hopeful sign. The modern state, whether he wants it or not, needs constantly to raise the general level of education. Even the totalitarian state needs intelligent citizens to ensure that it is not at a disadvantage in the struggle for military and industrial supremacy. On the other hand, they must be loyal and obedient and must not risk contamination by undesirable doctrines. But is it possible to educate people without, at the same time, exposing them to unorthodox ideas? The more educated people are, assuming that education does not just mean training in technological skills, the more they become aware of their individuality, and the less will the structure of society be organized like a beehive. Which set of ideas will gain the upper hand cannot be discussed here, but all intellectuals, whether they are opposed to centralization and planning, or approve of a society so ordered, want to give it a more human face, whether they are believers who think genuine reform is only possible on the basis of orthodox Christian teaching, or are against the whole machine of government and want only to pursue a simple, natural life, all hold one thing in common: opposition to the tyranny of the state. That so many minds in so many countries agree on this leads one to conclude that centralization and bureaucratic controls, however much they may thrive today, will not be permitted unlimited growth.